Alright, we're going to continue looking at solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. And again, that formula is x equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Number one, we have the quadratic 2x squared minus 7x minus 3 equals 0. Remember, before we can use this formula, we got to make sure that the equation is equal to 0, which it is. And we also want to make sure that this is in standard form, which again, it is. 2x squared minus 7x minus 3 is considered standard form. So what we're going to do first is go ahead and identify the a, the b, and the c. A is our leading coefficient, the number in front of the x squared, which in our case is a 2. B, that's the number in front of the x, which is a negative 7. And c is what we call our constant, negative 3. Alright, now that I know the values, we're going to plug those numbers into the formula. So we got x equals negative b. So here's the negative b, plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4. Here's my a, here's my c. All of that divided by 2 times a. A is a 2. At this point, I've got all the numbers plugged into the formula. Now we're actually going to start doing the arithmetic. Here we have a negative and a negative. A negative times a negative 7 makes this a positive 7. Plus and minus the square root of something. Negative 7 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 3. If we input that into our calculator, we end up with a 73. And if I multiply 2 times 2, 2 times 2 is a 4. So at this point I have x is equal to 7 plus and minus the square root of 73 all over 4. Now notice here, if we try and take the square root of 73, what's going to happen is we're going to end up with a decimal. And rather than writing the decimal, we're going to go ahead and leave it in this radical form. What I'm going to do though is go ahead and break this up so we can see both of our answers. So we have 7 plus the square root of 73 over 4. And we also have the solution x equals 7 minus the square root of 73 over 4. So these are my two solutions to this quadratic. Alright, example number 2, we have the quadratic x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. We're going to use the quadratic formula to solve this equation. Notice how it's equal to 0. Also notice that the equation or the quadratic is in standard form. So I'm going to go ahead and identify a, b, and c. A is our leading coefficient, that's 1. B, that's the number in front of the x, negative 4. And c, that's our 2. So these are the three numbers that I'll be plugging into the formula. So here we go. X equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2 times a. So there's the first part, plugging in the values into the formula. Now we're going to start doing the math. When we multiply a negative with another negative, we get a positive 4 plus and minus the square root of something. If I input this into my calculator, negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2, I end up with 8. And down at the bottom we have 2 times 1, and 2 times 1 is 2. Now, if I try and take the square root of 8, what I'm going to end up with is a decimal. And rather than using the decimal, we're going to see if we can't simplify the square root of 8. So what I'm going to do is take that square root of 8 and simplify it. Notice that 4 times 2 is 8. So the square root of 8 would be the equivalent of the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. The square root of 4 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 8. And the reason I want to do this is because I can take the square root of 4. The square root of 4 becomes a 2. So now I have 2 square root of 2. So what I'm going to do is replace that 8 square root of 8 with a 2 square root of 2 all over 2. Now, I'm not done dividing or simplifying. So what I'm going to do is I notice that 4, 2, and 2 all have something in common. They're all divisible by 2. So I'm going to simplify or reduce this. So starting with that 4, notice that 2 goes into 4. Goes in there twice. 2 goes into 2 once. So I end up with the square root of 2. And again, 2 goes into this 2 one time as well. So I end up with x is equal to 2 plus and minus the square root of 2. Now I'm just going to go ahead and separate these two so that you can see the two solutions. One of the solutions is x equals 2 plus the square root of 2, and the other is x equals 2 minus the square root of 2. So these are our two solutions to this quadratic. Alright, example number 3, we have the quadratic 9x squared plus 4x minus 16 is equal to 0. Just as I did in the first two examples, I'm going to identify my a, my b, and my c. A is 9, b is 4, and c is negative 16. So these are the numbers I'm plugging into the formula. So we got x equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4 a and c, all divided by 2 times a. So there's the numbers plugged into the formula. Alright, so if we start off with a negative 4 plus and minus the square root of something. Again, if I enter this into my calculator, 4 squared minus 4 times 9 times a negative 16, I'm going to end up with 592. My denominator, if I multiply 2 times 9, I get a 18. Now once again, if I try and take the square root of 592, I end up with a decimal. And I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can't simplify this square root of 592. So what I'm looking for are two numbers that I can multiply together to get 592. I just need to make sure that one of those numbers is a perfect square, something I can take the square root of. So in this case, we're going to be using a 16 and a 37. If I multiply 16 times 37, I end up with 592. And the reason I chose those two numbers is because we have the square root of 16. That's what we call a perfect square. We can take the square root of that number. The square root of 16 is 4. So that square root of 16 now becomes a 4. Still got the square root of 37. So what we're going to do here is we're going to replace that square root of 592 with a 4 square root of 37. Of course, I still got that denominator 18. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can't simplify or reduce this. You'll notice I have a 4, and an 18. There's something that goes into all three of those numbers. All of those numbers are divisible by 2. So what I'm going to be doing here is dividing each of those numbers by 2. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Same thing here. 4 divided by 2 is 2. I leave the square root of 37 alone. Down at the bottom, 2 also goes into 18. It goes in there 9 times. So I can simplify or reduce this to negative 2 plus and minus the square root of 2 square root of 37 over 9. But again, so that you can see the two solutions, we end up with x equals negative 2 plus 2 square root of 37 over 9. That's one of the solutions. And we also have x equals negative 2 minus 2 square root of 37 over 9. Therefore, these are my two solutions to this quadratic.